Welcome to today's episode of Insights with Us. I'm Anastasia, a licensed professional counselor, owner of Happy Mind Wellness Company, a Colorado-based therapy practice, and creator of this podcast. My goal is to use this platform to help others find their voice as we share our journeys and show support as we learn more about ourselves and life. As a disclaimer, there may be swearing in this podcast, but sometimes we get caught up in the human experience. It happens, and sometimes we can talk about difficult or activating topics. So maybe put on some headphones if you need to, and remember that support exists for you if you want it. Today, I am joined by Amanda Ng, an integrative mind-body therapist and founder of Mind to Matter. She works with clients around the world in navigating challenges such as anxiety, depression, trauma, burnout, and chronic stress, along with the ripple effect these have on their physical health, sense of connection, and work performance. You can find her at mindtomatter.co. That's mindtomatter.co. Together, in this episode, we explore the differences and similarities within the human experience across cultures and how it relates to trauma. What is trauma? We connect our life experiences, process the mind-body connection and how it shifts when there's trauma present. We process what it means to slow down and build insight into reactions that we don't understand, and rethink how to show up in the world, which is a very difficult change to make. In listening back on this episode, I love how passionate we both are and how, with 15 years and thousands of miles separating us, we have much more in common than we realized. With that said, let's get comfortable and see if we can build some insight today. Welcome to Insights with Us.
Hello, hello. I'm glad to be here. I'm so excited.
Yes, I am so excited too. And you are yet another person from my past that we'd kind of disconnected for a minute, and now we're reconnecting and finding that there is so much in common. And so, really, I am so excited for this conversation today because we are talking about trauma. Oh, such a heavy thing to be
The
excited to talk
mystical
about.
trauma. Yeah, yeah.
Let's just start with just a blanket question, very general. What is trauma?
This is an interesting question. I think when I got into this work a couple years ago, right, I think even my understanding of trauma was really warped. There's this camp of people that think of it as this like really heavy, really big, really scary thing. And I didn't experience this massive life-changing event. And therefore, like, I must not have any trauma. Like, I haven't experienced trauma, right? And then you
My
have,
situation
um,
isn't as bad as theirs.
exactly. Right.
Mhm.
There are people that have experienced much worse. And there's almost this, I don't think I deserve to say that I have trauma or I have all of that. And then there's this other camp of people. And I don't know how. So when I think of this other camp of people, I think back to when I was in the States in college, and it was used way too casually and freely. And my roommate, after coming back from a Rush event, was like, oh my God, that was traumatizing. And so multiple meanings, right? And I think at least for the purpose of this conversation, and I think a lot of the examples and stories that we're going to share, I just wanted to kind of level set what we mean by trauma.
Beautiful idea.
I was talking to a family friend not too long ago. And she told me an interesting story that didn't directly relate to trauma, but it kind of stuck in my mind. And I think it's a pretty interesting metaphor or symbol for what trauma is. She's at home, she's like walking around. I don't know what she was doing with her foot, but somehow she like snagged it, knocked a door frame.
Ooh,
And she stubbed her toe, right? But it was a pretty bad stub to the extent that she fractured some toes. And it was just, I'm sure she was in a lot of pain. I'm sure it was really uncomfortable in the days after. And she was saying actually in the weeks and even months to follow, what she observed when she approached this door frame was that her feet would curl up, her toes would curl up. And she didn't have a name for it. Obviously, it wasn't limiting her in any way. It was just something that she observed every time she walked by that door frame again, right? And this door frame really has not done anything to her. She is the one that kicked the door frame, right? And I walked away from that conversation just thinking that is like an interesting perspective for trauma as well, right? Because this acute event, doesn't even need to be acute, but this event happened, right, that hurt you. And there was pain there. There was this like moment that you remember or moments that you remember.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the time after that, there's a that lives in your memory, that lives in the memory of, in her case, her foot. And actually, for me, trauma is that memory, right? Or that the curling, the instinct to approach something that might not be immediately familiar, but almost have this like very instinctive protective mechanism come up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it could be physical, like the curling of your toes. It could be something emotional. It could be a thought process or a belief, right? But it's something that instinctively comes up as a, oh, I feel like there's something here that is familiar and not in a great way,
Mm-hmm.
actually, right? It's that learned fear, it's that learned anxiety, it's that learned, sometimes visceral reaction to something that actually, again, going back to that door frame, it's a
Mm-hmm.
harmless door frame,
Yeah.
right? And I think a lot of people look at trauma as trauma is her knocking, is the actual incident of the stubbing of the toe, right? Or trauma is the injury, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
don't really see trauma that way. I see trauma as what changes within you
Yeah.
as a product of that injury or that event. And yeah, I'm like curious actually how that lands with you and what
Yeah.
your definition or what you observe trauma to be.
What I say about trauma is it's not the event that happens, it's how your body handles it and how it gets
Mhm.
stored in your body,
Mhm.
right? And there's this model in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, where it's called the AIP model, adaptive information processing. And the idea behind it is that everything is adaptive.
Mhm.
Everything that you do, even if it's a reaction that you don't understand or you don't want to be reacting that way, it is coming from some memory somewhere deep within your system that made it useful at one point.
Exactly.
So her curling
That's
her
exactly that.
toes, that is survival. That is her protecting her feet, even if it's just so automatic. That is her body being adaptive, going, ooh, curling the toes in this particular part of the house is really useful. We're going to keep doing it, even though technically we're safe and we don't need to do it anymore.
Exactly. And if you extrapolate that out, it could have been that now every time she approaches any door frame, even though that seems even more bizarre for her to just be curling her toes every time she approaches a door frame. But that is what we do with these
Mm-hmm.
adaptive mechanisms that we build when we experience something that at some point hurt us or scared us, or we needed to respond to it in some way for survival. Right now, as adults, approaching something that might not be obviously similar
Mm-hmm.
or even logically similar, but having that same instinctive behavior, that same instinctive pattern, that same instinctive emotion come up. Yeah, that's stored memory. I
Yeah.
really like that definition. That is the trauma.
And what's so wild about it and our bodies is that there's this weird, like messy middle stage of growth and
Mhm.
progress because, again, that was really useful at one point. And maybe it's something like you get into a car accident and you want to be numb to the details. You don't want to be super present and mindful when you're going through a wreck. Or if you're in an abusive relationship, you want to be invisible and make yourself smaller and not rock the boat at all. And so that pattern that you have learned that is adaptive in your body is so important in that survival for however amount of time, whether it was a single event or complex and chronic. And then this messy middle stage happens. And I love pointing it out to everyone who will listen to me, which is you get frustrated that it's there.
Yeah.
But
You judge it.
you judge it. But the frustration literally means that you have healed enough that you no longer need it in your body. So it is a sign of growth and progress and that you're ready to let it go, but you don't know how to yet. Because if you still needed it, it wouldn't frustrate you.
Yeah. And it's also scary, right? It's this potentially behavior, part of your identity,
Yeah.
belief, something that potentially for a very long time you've clung to. And you're realizing actually now this is not serving me. Actually, this is holding me back. It's affecting my relationships. It's affecting my work. It's affecting whatever it is. And you're right. Like the moment you say, oh, that's frustrating, right? You're judging this part of you that at one point served you really well, and maybe for a long time served you really well. And it's a difficult, relearning of that relationship. And actually, how can I behave differently in certain situations? How can I regain a bit more control
Mhm.
and not fall back into these default settings?
And I love that you used parts work there too, like it's language,
Yeah.
because that part was useful. That part helped you be alive and survive whatever you went through. So, yeah, you're frustrated because you don't need it anymore, but can we give it that part of you gratitude and love and thank it for everything that it did for us? Like the fact that it knows to curl my toes so that I don't break my pinky again. Like, that's so nice that my body's doing that for me without me even thinking about it. But also, maybe we can heal and move forward and not do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing what I think that softening can do, actually.
Mhm.
That softening almost tells it like, actually, it's okay for you not to show up
Mhm.
every time I see a door frame anymore,
Yeah. Like, I'm good. We're
right?
good.
Yeah. Yeah, we're good. Thanks for being here, but I think I'm okay now, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I just thought it was a nice little analogy for what trauma is. And
Yeah.
maybe back to that point, for her, it was this singular knock of a door frame.
Mhm.
But for other people, it is, like you said, a more chronic thing, right? It is a more repeated exposure to something that caused you to flex and adapt your behavior in a certain
Yeah.
way.
And it could be violent, but it could also be like a very stressful workplace over the course of
Yeah,
years, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Let's shift a little and talk about trauma in different cultures
Hmm.
and maybe just mental health in different cultures as well. We can keep it more broad because if you live in Singapore now, you've lived in different countries, you have, similar to me, been exposed to so many different cultures in your lifetime,
Yeah,
but you are
yeah.
also actively in a very different culture from me right now.
Hmm.
When you think about those cultural differences or what you notice in the culture you're currently in, what do you see? What are the patterns?
I'm actually curious, and maybe I'll throw this question back at you.
Okay.
Maybe we can discuss it a little bit, right?
Mhm.
But when you think of Asian culture, Asian
Mhm.
values, right? What comes to mind for you?
Hmm.
I'm actually curious if we differ here, but
Yeah.
let's see.
I think my go-to is just the difference in the collectivistic versus individualistic. So I grew up, I mean, in Indonesia with you, and
Yeah.
then sometime in the UAE in Abu Dhabi, and then here in the United States as an adult, and like bounce back a lot. But in Abu Dhabi, it was like fantasy land. People just
Mm.
went, I want that thing, I'm going to buy it. They didn't really think about if anybody else wanted anything. It was just like, I don't care, I want it, right? And in Indonesia, there was so much more empathy
Mm.
from a place of like, I care about how my family is doing. I care about how you across the street are doing. I'm going to smile and check in with you and make sure that you are good before I feed myself.
Yeah.
And in America, the way I always describe it, it's like the land of convenience. I want
Mm.
everything and I want it now. 2 day shipping wasn't fast enough. I need 1 day shipping. And I want instant streaming and I want the fastest internet and I want all of my stuff in one store versus wandering around and going to each store for what you want.
Yeah.
And it is very like, what do I want? I need it now. Help me. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
my like go-to reaction. But I'm curious
Yeah.
if any of that is resonating for you.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I thought about was like thinking as a we instead of an I,
Mhm.
right? And so a lot of what you said in terms of empathy, but I think more thinking about your role in the context of what is this family unit or community structure that I'm contributing to? What is my role, right?
Mhm.
And if we think at the family level, right, it could even be like I am the oldest and I have, if you're a son or if you're a daughter, like that might entail a different role, right? If you're the youngest, if you're the baby, if you're the middle child, if you are the smart one, if you are the reliable one, if you are the kind one, you have a role. And it's a very relational
Yeah.
sort of life experience that you have,
And
right?
what you are good at, what your role is there to serve everyone.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And so for me, when I think about my childhood, so I grew up in a family of four, and my dad is a pretty serious person,
Mhm.
right? And definitely the decision maker of the family, right? He carries a lot of the weight in conversations, he carries a lot of the weight in family decisions.
Yeah.
And so his level of seriousness does in many ways set the tone for conversations around the dinner table, whether it's just our family or with other families or our broader family, right? And part of what I think I brought to the family is like this sense of lightness sometimes, right? Because in that like that tension can be kind of scary.
Yeah.
And I came in as this, I think he softened a little bit too with me because I'm like the only daughter, I'm the youngest. And so I brought a lot of levity, some humor into a lot of these family environments, family dynamics. And growing up, I think I really leaned into that. And I always wanted to be this, like, oh, if it feels a little bit tense, like, how do I break the ice a little bit? How do I de-escalate this a little bit? But I think as a kid, I don't want to go as far as to say it is a survival mechanism. But I think we're so good as children actually at learning what make our parents happy and upset.
It's a connection mechanism. Like instead of survival, it helps you stay with your family and stay accepted in your family.
Yeah. And it gives you some sense of value. It gives you some sense of identity,
Mhm.
right? But it's something you quickly develop. And I think in Asian contexts, you may potentially like are more attuned to those things that your family needs and how you can provide those things, whether it is being the funny one, whether it is for me, I think it was also like I don't want my parents to worry about me. And so I'm really going to like do my best to be independent. And when you're a kid, it's independence at school. So
Mhm.
like just working really hard and being the kid that like my parents can very easily say, "Oh, Mandy's okay and she's doing a great
Mhm.
job at school and maybe they'll boast about me to their friends."
We share
Right.
that.
And it really becomes, yeah, and it really becomes ingrained in your identity, right? And then when you become an adult and you're so tied to achievement and success, right? You become addicted to it.
Mhm.
And the moment that part of you is threatened, actually, that's when your survival mechanism kicks in. That's when you're like, oh, actually, there's something that feels really uncomfortable about this. There's something that feels really uncomfortable about failure, about the idea of failure, about criticism, about all of those things that are actually really normal and
Yeah.
just part of life. There's a curling of the toes in some way.
Yeah.
There's an anxiety.
I'm trying to compare your life story to mine
Yeah.
because obviously, like, I'm Caucasian. I'm very white. I am all of the white races mixed together into one person. But I didn't grow up in America.
Yeah.
And my parents definitely raised me take care of yourself, do your homework,
Mm,
make sure that you're good. But I also have all of those undercurrents that you are describing of like, yes, but who am I to this family? And is everyone else good? And I'm constantly like, I forget to check in with myself. If other people are around, I always make sure they're good and we're comfortable as a group. And then I look at
yeah.
myself and I go, what do I need? Ooh, I haven't had water all day because I've been so focused on making sure everyone else is okay. There is a lot of that we in my life and how I show up.
Mm.
And even just yesterday, no, 2 days ago, I remember I was talking to my partner about like, I don't do leisure time that I can't pause. If somebody needs something, I stop and I do it.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I don't go, no, I'm in the middle of something. And this is something that he's been trying to get me to just have time to myself and ignore everybody else. And he was getting frustrated with me. And he was like, you just stop caring about us. Like, stop doing it. We can wait. I'm like, no, you can't. I need to make sure we are all good before
Yeah.
I can be good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so this kind of takes the conversation in a different direction, but then it makes you think. I do wonder actually if in Asian societies there's more of this propensity or this like urge to like, I want to help people, I want to fix things, I want to change things. I
Hmm.
don't know that it's unique to, it's definitely not unique to Asians. It's a very
Yeah.
universal
Hmm.
urge, I think. But what you're saying, what comes to mind is like, at that point when you are thinking about, okay, I'm going to drop my stuff and fix this other person's problem. Whose anxiety are you trying to fix?
I mean,
Right. And
obviously
is
my
it,
own. I know this. I know that it's my discomfort that they might be uncomfortable, that they are good and they can handle it and they can do it alone, but I know I can ease that. And so it's
yeah,
like this desire to help hold the burden, this
yeah,
desire to be
yeah,
like, no, I see you, we're a team, we got this. But then most of the time it ends up me doing all of it for everybody. And then I'm exhausted.
yeah. It's exhausting. It is tiring. I think I experience very similar things, and I'm always having to check myself. It's also likely why we're in this line of work as
Yes.
therapists, helping people on a daily basis or trying to,
Yeah.
attempting to. Yeah, I'm actually reminded as we talk about this. Uh, I guess you talked a lot about you are white in many ways, but grew up in a very Asian
Yeah.
context. And I feel like I had an opposite experience.
Mm.
So if I took 23andMe, I'm very certain that I will come out like 100% Han Chinese. Like
Mhm.
I feel I look very Chinese, but I grew up in a unique TCK or third culture kid situation because
Mhm.
I am Indonesian. So I was born and raised in Jakarta, but I was raised in this like international school bubble that we went to. And of course, as a kid, a lot of your time you spend at school, right? A lot of your friends you make at school, a lot
Mhm.
of the cultural norms I would say that you adhere to also comes from your classmates and your friends and whatever they dictate as popular culture. And I think at a school like JIS, it was very of the West, right? And
Mhm.
so I had this interesting experience of I'm growing up in this relatively liberal Western bubble, right? But I'm living very close to Asian tradition and
Mhm.
Asian routines and Asian dynamics. And it's something that I think growing up, it was like a point of contention almost between me and my parents because
Mhm.
there are things that they see as defiant. There are things that they see as selfish. There are things that they see as disrespectful. And meanwhile, I'm over here, oh, I'm just living my life and I am doing what, feels right to me and speaks to my values and excites me. And the difference in values actually became very clear the older that I got. And so that's another observation I see now, right? Because I don't think I'm unique in this. I think in general,
Oh, for
um,
sure.
Asia has always looked to the West, right? Colonial things.
Mm.
Like Asians have always looked to the West. And I think slowly they're like the younger generation, our generation, and probably the generations before us compared to the generations before them, there is this movement to the I sometimes, or the me.
And with the internet, which is newer with our generation, like we are technically older than Google, I believe. And so we suddenly have the ability to see all the other cultures in the world. And there is more of a blending of culture because we just have more access to it. And so I remember when I first moved to Abu Dhabi, social media wasn't really a thing. I just
Mm,
lost all of my friends. I found some of them a few years ago from that time when I was really young. But like all of my friends from my neighborhood street, like none of us knew how to talk to each other ever again. And
yeah,
but then I moved from Abu Dhabi to Indonesia and suddenly we had Facebook and we had
yeah,
MySpace and we had all of these pieces. And I'm like, no, I can actually still be friends with all of you, even though I literally live around the world.
yeah,
That's why you and I are able to talk
yeah.
right now. So, with that, there is going to be a shift. And maybe
Yeah.
on your side, there is a little bit more of like we to I. People are finding like, hey, it is okay to speak up. It is okay to set boundaries for myself. Like self care does matter here. And I hope my dream is maybe it can go the other way too, where I to we, where we can start
Yeah.
understanding how can I as a person serve my family, my community, my society, and understand that we each have a role and we all need to support each other.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think with this shift, with this comparison, and looking at generational differences, I think actually the trauma or these learned fears, these learned anxieties, these learned associations, I think they come to the forefront because you see now where the friction lies between you and your parents.
Mhm.
And so actually now in a lot of the work with my clients, whenever family comes into the mix, there's always conversations around what family trauma is here, actually. And like, how do I break out of that trauma respectfully, right? Or how do I break out of these behaviors respectfully without being seen as defiant or selfish, right? As just doing something that is healthy for me. Yeah.
Oh, I love that you went here. What comes to mind for me is all the different ways that generational trauma could hypothetically show up
Mm.
in a kid. Because one, it can just perpetuate the pattern, right? If some parent is abusive, the child could grow up to be abusive. But it could, if the parent is silent, we don't talk about it, push it down, suck it up. No, your mental health doesn't exist. Like just pretend to be
Yeah.
fine. Then the child can grow up to shut down and pretend they're fine and never want to talk about it, right? But it can also go the other way where like in that abusive example it's like I will never touch my kid ever, I am breaking this cycle, like no, right? Or in the case of shutting down but all that pain is still there, all that trauma is still there, the child unintentionally might end up carrying all of that
Yeah.
pain for their parent and could show up more anxious, more panicked, panic
Mm.
attacks, and not having any idea why they feel that way inside.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What comes to mind as you say that actually is it's the suppression of emotion actually that comes to mind,
Mhm.
right? More so than obviously there are these abusive situations. I work less with those cases,
But
more with
this,
cases, more in
let's talk
cases
about the
where,
suppression because it's more nuanced and I feel like we don't
yeah,
talk about it all that much. So let's focus there. I agree.
yeah. I think it is more common in this part of the world to hide your emotion a bit more, right? And any outburst of emotion, any expression of emotion, people are quite sensitive to, right? Families are quite sensitive to. And even in the language, when I'm working with clients and they'll say things like this really annoyed me or this really frustrated me, right? Annoyance and frustration are really just a form of anger, but
Mhm.
it's so difficult for people to even say, this made me really angry. Because angry has its own sort of cultural associations, right? Angry
Mhm.
means you are like almost out of control. Like angry means it's like an outburst, disorder, like
Mhm.
chaos, all of those things. Whereas you can be annoyed and still be composed.
Have control over your emotion.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's what I'm noticing. And when we get to a point where, okay, so a client will say, this thing really annoyed me. And then we'll dig a little bit more into that, right? And as she or he explains this story, this incident where this person annoyed him or her, there's a bit more emotion that comes up. There's a bit more energy. There's a bit more loudness in his or her voice. And then I'll ask again, actually, what are you feeling now? In this safe space, the safe container with me, what do you feel? And it's only in this container that they're able to say, actually, I am like really freaking mad.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
And
powerful.
and it's something that, and I think until you get to that emotion and until you're able to understand actually the depth of the emotion, right? And let the emotion, give the emotion some space and really listen to what you are mad about, not annoyed about, but mad about,
Hmm.
right? That's where a lot of the movement and unlocking comes from. But it's hard when you're sitting in this like tense, like, I am just annoyed,
You're not really
right?
actually feeling it or letting it out or processing it in any way. You're just like, yep, that's a
Yeah,
thing. Let's move on. Like it's there. It's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's still very much at this head level, at this story level, right? It's not at the felt level yet because you're only letting yourself be annoyed. Yeah.
My mind is jumping back to the I versus we here. Because
Mm.
again, there's just so many layers and it's so nuanced. But if we are focused on a we collective,
Mm.
we are here to serve, then showing anger or crying in the middle of a conversation could negatively impact the we, even if it could lead to stronger bonds or even a more vulnerable and incredible space. It might not help whatever it is you are moving through, right? The productivity of the collective we. And so having some sort of an emotional outburst could be seen as unacceptable. Even if it's not explicitly named, there's this pressure to stay in control all the time. Versus the I, it's like I'm feeling this, so I don't even care. Right? Like the
Yeah.
number of people that I know that finally found themselves and feel so confident in their authentic being that are like, this is just who I am. So you can just leave. Like it's so I, right?
Which is a whole nother monster in
It's a
itself.
whole other thing. But there's this beautiful place in the middle. And that's
Hmm.
where it's I am me, but I care about us. Right? It's like I can be compassionate towards the fact that like me being angry might upset you or make you uncomfortable too, but I am feeling this way and I trust you enough. I trust our relationship enough that I can sit here and go, I am angry. I am
Hmm.
upset and know that we together can get through it.
There's a lot of self-trust that's needed. There's a lot of trust in the relationship. There's a lot of trust that you need to have in the resilience of this other person and the extent to which this other person can adapt for you, right? I think that's really needed. And I think in the case of an emotion like anger, actually, which can be expressed through these big outbursts, anger is almost like what's at the surface for most people. And so if you're not able to even address what's at the surface, it's really hard to tackle any of the really tough stuff beneath that. But if you're able to tap in on the anger and bring a bit of curiosity to that anger, even if it starts with an outburst, even if it starts with an outburst, then getting to a point of together in partnership as a family, as friends, as whatever unit you want to talk about, to be able to ask, actually, why was I so angry? Now that you've admitted that you're angry, like,
Yeah.
why? Why the heck were you so angry?
Hmm. Yeah. What is in
Right?
that anger? What's underneath the anger? Let's actually see what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am so excited that you get to be that person for all of these people.
It's an exciting place, I think. It's a fun, and I feel like fun might not be the right word, but I think it's an interesting place to be doing this work. Because even for me, so for me, actually, when I came into this work, and now a big part of my work actually is body-based and somatic.
Mhm.
I'm a big believer, I'm sure you're a big believer of everything is connected. And so everything that you feel at the head level, there is some emotion there. Everything that has an emotion is like expressed somewhere in your body, held somewhere in your body. And I think for a lot of people that have trouble even going into their emotions, sometimes going into your body is even harder.
Oh, yeah. It does not feel safe.
It's hard. It's
Mhm.
hard. And I think a lot of people have just numbed that part of themselves or disconnected from that part of themselves for so long that even when I started off this work, I was a receiver of therapy for many years as well. And questions like, where do you feel that emotion? Where do you feel that anger in your body? I would have to think so hard, like, where do I feel that anger in my body? Like, where does it live? And going through that experience with my clients and making these parts of whether it's like emotion level or body level more accessible to them, like more attuned to them. I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I feel like there's such a need. I'm sure there's a need where you are as well.
In this
Look,
world.
I look everywhere, and maybe it's a function of being human, but I think in some pockets of the world where emotion is harder to express, or you're living in a city where the parts of you that are needed to survive might be much more like at the head level, like when you're at the office.
Yeah.
It's really easy to say that emotions don't have space, but where does your logic, what does your logic tell you? And like, how do we develop that logic and analytical thinking and reasoning and all of that stuff?
From that trauma perspective, it's survival, right? It is so much
Yeah.
safer of a feeling to never experience the uncomfortable emotions. If you do have anger or fear or sadness or anxiety, it's so much easier if you can just push it down and stay
Yeah.
logical. If you, this is something I've been dealing with a lot of different clients recently, where they can say what they're feeling and they can explain why they're feeling it and they can explain all the memories tied to that feeling that they know they're experiencing. But they can be like, it's sad and I'm so upset about it. And then they go into all of these reasons, but then they're not actually crying and they're not actually sad. And it's like you're so busy thinking about the experience that you're forgetting that experiencing it is a part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it keeps them safe. They don't have to feel it
Hmm.
if they keep thinking about the feeling.
Safer to think it than experience it, than go back into it. Yeah.
As we are talking, there's another theory that's coming to mind for me. It's called polyvagal theory.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so the vagus nerve is starts at the base of your skull and runs down your vocal cords and has its hand in almost every organ in your body. It's this giant nerve. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is the nerve that is in charge of your fight or flight response. And I know you're not, I'm explaining this for our listeners that don't know, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why it has a hand in everything is when you're in fight or flight, your digestion slows down, your breathing quickens, your heart rate increases. This nerve has to be able to activate every part of your body so that you can then fight off whatever it is that you're coming to face with, right? So you have your fight or flight, you have your freeze, and then you have that safety system.
Yeah.
And so many people have the belief that we only need safety. I just want to feel safe. I want to feel good. I want to feel content. I want to be healed. That means I can be safe all the time. But that's a myth. You can't only always feel safe and never feel anything else because then you're not going to survive. Your body's job isn't to make you happy, it is to survive. So the goal is being able to jump back and forth between these systems as needed and not getting stuck in any of them.
Yeah. I talk a lot about polyvagal theory with my clients. And one of the exercises we do together usually is mapping out their unique nervous
Mm,
system states, right?
yeah.
Like when they are in this free state, when they are in their fight or flight state, when they are in their safety or connected state, right? Like what are the things that trigger that? What are the things what are your common behaviors? What do you notice in your body when you're in each of these states? And I think it's really easy to not even notice when we're in these states, right?
Yeah.
Because they're so automatic. And it is really easy, actually, when you're in your fight or flight to stay there because you feel this is what I need to do. This is where I need to be to survive.
Like with chronic stress in a workplace, it's so much
Yeah.
easier to always stay in that state of chronic stress, to believe I can't stop. There's no time. I have to keep going. I just have another project just after this deadline. Then I'll slow down. No, no, no. I can't slow down. There's another deadline. And it just this
Yeah.
constant level of panic and stress that never slows down.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in, the early part of my work, and I started off my career as a management consultant, really floundering, but I I would get an email. I would get an email from my boss or my manager or even my associate at the time, right? And I remember the very visceral reaction I would get, right, from just a message, right? My heart rate would pick up, right? I would get like kind of sweaty and like anxious, and I'd be nervous for a long time just thinking about this email, right? And if you think back to, again, polyvagal theory, vagus nerve, like all of these things are in place in order to help you survive, right? So there's something about that situation that feels like it's life or death. Even though when you take a step back and like I could be anywhere, I might be in the comfort of my own home. Like I might be on my couch receiving this email from my manager, like feeling this like intense anxiety and being kicked into my fight or flight mode when this email is likely not going to kill me.
No.
And imagine being in that environment all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right, whether it's an email, whether it's, oh, another work opportunity has come up, like whether it's a meeting that you have to prepare for a presentation, whether it's just getting feedback,
Mm-hmm.
even. And like all of these things that are triggering this part of you, this anxiety, this anxious part of you.
And then one step further, if you were taught to suppress it and you are suppressing it for the collective group, you're getting this
Hmm.
chronic panic, this anxiety. Your body is telling you that this email could kill you. And then your reaction is, no, shove it down. It doesn't
No,
matter. Push it. It
yeah,
doesn't, no,
we
ignore it.
have to address it.
It doesn't
Yeah,
exist. Just push through, get that email done. And then your body learns, oh, this is bad. We should panic more next time.
yeah. And the more you stay in this activated state, all of those parts of your body that are working harder than they were ever designed to, right? Your heart is beating faster, your digestion slows. So I guess that is more of a dysregulation more than anything else. But your muscle tension, like heartbeat, your breath, all of this stuff that's working way harder than it was ever designed to is now stuck as well. It's stuck
Mm,
with you.
yeah.
And with so many studies now around associations between or correlations between stress and like heart disease, stress and immunity dysregulation, stress and like autoimmune conditions, all of this stuff, like it's not surprising when you're keeping your body in the overworked state for so long. And you're teaching your body actually we can power through. And you're teaching your body that all of the things that it was designed to fear and target and fight back, we can accept these things. And when I think of that, I think so much of autoimmune conditions
Mm-hmm.
and how we're giving our body and mind these confusing signals for what it should accept.
Yeah.
Right. And so, of course, it'll lose its ability or like its sense for like, what is good and what is bad for
Mm-hmm.
itself.
Our bodies get pushed so hard and then it hits a limit and then it drops into dorsal vagus, that freeze state where you dissociate,
Yeah.
you shut down, your body automatically numbs you. And that could look like scrolling on social media for 6 hours and not even realizing where the time went. It could be
Yeah.
decision paralysis. It could be losing track of time. It could be so many different things, but you drop and dissociate and numb until you've healed just enough that your body can jump back into that high stress state for you.
Yeah. And then it's this vicious cycle sometimes, right, of like toggling back and forth between your dorsal and your sympathetic,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not spending any, maybe losing what it means to be in this safe, connected
Mm-hmm.
place, right? Thinking that what you're doing right now is like safe in some way.
So I can't help but jump to the what do we do about it question.
Mm.
And I've got a little bit of an answer, but I want to leave it open to you first and then we can nerd out about it together. So,
Yeah.
how do you heal that? How do you teach your clients to do this?
Yeah. It's a process, it's a journey. It can be intense for a lot of people. The first thing I think is just the noticing. And we talked a lot about how when we go through life, our default patterns, we really lose this a sense for what we're doing sometimes, what state we're in, right? Like what adaptive mechanism or response actually is coming out at any moment. And so the first thing is just noticing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like just really understanding actually like when I am making certain decisions, like where is this response coming from?
Yeah, you can't
Right. And
work on
allowing,
showing up differently if you don't even know what's there.
Yeah, you don't know that there's a problem, right? And at least with a lot of the clients that I work with, right, to them, what they see is their productivity, right? And their sense of achievement. And their, you know what, this like being in fight or flight mode, which they probably wouldn't even call the state they're in fight or flight. For them, it's just, I'm like just working hard and this is what I need to do, like get to the next level or to get that promotion or to get that salary bump
Yeah,
or
but can you rest and
whatever.
actually feel rested at the end of it?
Yeah.
That's a cue
Like
for me.
actually, yeah. And where's all the anxiety that you feel actually? Right? Like, is that also part of the story or the bigger picture? When you talk about your productivity and your success, can you talk about it like actually how much of a role or how much of a presence does, do things like anxiety and stress have? Right? And without pushing those away and sweeping those under the rug, yeah, how big are those things actually? Right? And let's acknowledge that first. Right? Let's acknowledge, like, okay, even though the success and all of that might be really great, right? What part of this isn't so great that you're not telling me right now and that you're not admitting to yourself right now, right? And how might those things be affecting your physical health? How might they be affecting your relationships? Right? How might they be affecting even your performance, right? In ways that you won't admit because you don't know a different way. Right? But it's really just the noticing
As you're
that,
saying all of that,
yeah,
I'm thinking of the most typical answers that I get from that, from those questions, because great
yeah,
questions. I'm loving it. First, are you missing? Probably how tired you actually are. If you took a second to check in with your body, like
hmm,
you've drained yourself. Also, there's this piece of like, can't slow down, right? I have to keep going. I can't pause. And then that whole piece of what are you missing? The fact that if you actually take that moment and rest and find safety and recharge, research shows we are more productive. So
yeah,
pushing through and never taking that break and always staying in that chronic stress, fight or flight, sympathetic mode actually hinders your productivity over time.
it's not sustainable. And actually, earlier when we were talking about polyvagal theory, we talk about the third state of safety and connection, right? Which may be somewhat difficult for people to understand or recognize, but like for me, actually, the easiest way for me to explain it, because in today's culture, we talk about psychological safety all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is like, how do you feel when you experience psychological safety, right? When you're on a team where everyone is supportive, like no one is here to judge. How does that affect your ability to be creative and optimistic
Mm-hmm.
and enter flow and like really spitball ideas? Like, how much more outspoken and expressive can you be, right? And I think even beyond that, imagine if you're not reliant on this team or the company that you're at. Imagine if you could build that safety within yourself, or imagine if you could return to that safety within yourself and how much more outspoken, creative, curious you would be, independent of what other people thought,
Because you knew you
or
were safe.
actually independent of what you thought other people thought, right?
So
And how
powerful.
much performance you can unlock, right? If you really want to talk about performance and success, and there's that part of you that you're not even seeing yet. And so just noticing that the way you're operating right now may not be the best way, but at the very least is likely not sustainable, right? And exploring like what you are like, what is the full experience of that fight or flight state for you? What is it that triggers those things? What do you believe about yourself when you're in that state? Or in the dorsal, right? If you drop down into this freeze dorsal state. So it's really just first and noticing and recognize like, okay, these are the patterns that I think I want to relationship differently with,
Mhm.
right? Or partner differently with.
Yeah.
And then from there, I think it does require a ton of courage actually to explore different ways of working.
Because it's uncomfortable and it's different and you're breaking patterns. I know that when I break patterns, there's a lot of panic involved because you're trying to retrain your brain around what's safe and what isn't. My brain tells me that
Yeah.
thing that I want isn't safe. So I panic, but I actually do want it and it actually is safe. So I have to
Yeah.
teach my body and my brain that it's okay.
Yeah. You're telling me that my understanding of productivity is wrong. you're telling me that I should not be
Yeah.
productive at work for a while? Like, what does that mean for what my colleagues think of me, right? Or what my boss thinks of me, or the work that I can get done, and like the money that I need to bring home to my family, like whatever it is, right? Like all of these questions come up. And so I think just giving yourself that space and that permission to even explore what you could be
Mhm.
if not productive for this moment. That is a scary thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And once you're able to do that, actually, and you can relearn like what is good for you and what is bad for you, what is properly safe for you versus what is properly life or death for you, you get that email that pushes you into this fight or flight state. And it's okay to like, enter that fight or flight state. There's nothing wrong with being there, right? As you said earlier, it's about how long do you let yourself stay there?
Once you are safe, can you recognize it and drop into safety?
Yeah,
Or are you then stuck in fight or
yeah,
flight for the rest of the day or the rest of the week?
exactly. Like, once I get that email sitting on the couch, can I tell myself, you know what? This isn't life or death. This isn't existential. I think I'm okay. Maybe even laugh about the reaction a little bit. That's already like you're slowly retraining your brain that this thing isn't something that you need to be scared of.
Hmm.
You're already creating that safety within yourself.
Yeah.
And so once you find, whether it's that email, whether it's something else, right, that kicks in this state, you can retrain your brain to think differently about those things and to find safety in those things.
That's so
And
beautiful.
that's the work. Yeah.
It's hard work, but it's so valuable. My mind is expanding on it a little
Mm.
because, yes, you have to be able to notice the patterns. You need to be able to understand what the shift could be, right? Like holding space and distance from that belief that you hold so that you can turn it around and go, wait, do I want to keep holding on to this or do I want to let it go? Am I safe or am I actually in danger? If I'm actually in danger, yes, I want my fight or flight to activate. But if I'm actually safe, then I want to feel safe. Sometimes, and as we've talked about, it is so hard to trust that. And
Mm.
sometimes the chronic stress becomes our new normal. So that even if we can recognize logically we're safe, if we try to drop into that safety, it's almost scarier for our nervous system because it's not our normal. And our body will panic because we feel safe and try to jump us back into that fight or flight. With my clients who can't feel safety because it's too scary to actually feel
Yeah.
that, we try to
Yeah.
find neutral space first.
Mm.
What is the absence of stress, but absence of good? You're tired of being sad, but you're too afraid to be happy. What just doesn't feel? In our bodies, maybe it's tightness in your chest or like a drop in your stomach or like a pull in your throat. But are you feeling anything in your elbow? What about like your pinky toe? Maybe for your friend, you'll feel some stuff in her pinky toe, but her other pinky toe might be fine, right?
Yeah.
Where is there absence of sensation? Where is it just neutral? Can we sit in that space? In EMDR, there's this resource that it's kind of a meditative resource called Safe Calm Place, where you build a safe space for your mind that you can return to help you drop into that safety system. And if my clients will build this beautiful space and then we go, okay, sit in it, and then they can't. And I had a supervisor once say, build a beige room with beige furniture and just like a mundane view out the window. Because then it's
Mm.
not too perfect and our brains can actually sit in it easier.
How do you, I mean, I guess both of us work online,
Yeah.
right? So I'm curious, is the online setting neutral enough?
One of my favorite things to do with my clients is build a nest with them.
Mm.
So we choose, this is from EMDR. We build three different areas of safety. There's exteroception, so like what you're looking at, what you're feeling, what's going on in your space. What I'll say is like, there anything that you want to bring into your space that you've forgotten? Like you want to top off your drink, if you need to grab lotions, like I've got chapstick, I've got lotion, I've got fidget toys. I've got like fun things to look at on my desk that make me smile. I've got like a little like a foot sleeping bag to keep my feet warm. when I'm in session. I've got a blanket that
Yeah.
I can easily access. I'll show you, even though the people on the podcast can't see it.
Yeah.
Juliet can be right next to me if she wants to, so that there's always this connection here. I have it set up where everything I want is in my space, but I also make sure that there's nothing that is stressing me out to look at. So, like
Mm.
example, when I first moved here, everything that was extra for our house got piled in the center of my office. It was this giant pile, and every time I looked at it, my brain went, "You're not safe here." Like the chaos of this stressed me out. So day 2, I looked at my partner and I was like, "We have to change this. I cannot like look off to the side and see chaos because it's making my nest feel unsafe." So we
Yeah.
reorganized it and we put shelves in here. So like it's still not unpacked fully, but it feels better when I look at it. Okay,
Yeah.
so external space, how can we make it as safe as possible? Then it's proprioception, your body in space. So like, does your chair feel okay? Does it feel hard? Does it feel too soft? How is your body responding to where that is? Do you need that
Yeah.
blanket? Do you need to stretch real quick? And then the last one is that interoception. How's your internal space? What energy are you coming into here with? Is there something really important on your mind that we have to talk about before we do any of this trauma work? Are you
Mm.
in the headspace to do trauma work today? Or does it feel too vulnerable and we need to keep it lighter to help build that resilience in your nervous system? And so, anytime I do any trauma work with my clients, I always start with building a nest. And then I keep track of what they've brought into their space, what they want to take away, so that the next time they come in, I go, "Do you have your water? Did you grab those socks? Hey, that stack of papers that you moved last time, did they come back? Do we need to put that in a drawer? You have your super cozy hoodie? Go put it on. Go put it on. You know you need it to feel safe while we do this work." And it just, even
Yeah.
though we're remote, they know that they're good. And because I talk it through by sharing what's going on in my space, they know I'm good. And then our nervous
Mm.
systems can co regulate together.
And it's interesting too from that practice, right? What are these connections to safety that you built or reinforce? And what of that can you bring into the world with you? Or what of that can do you feel comfortable enough to use as a grounding or a reminder of your safety,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it is a certain smell, if it is like a certain object that you look at that makes you happy, like how can you use that as a comfort thing to
Yeah.
add a bit of glimmer to life that is stressful? It doesn't just need to be in this therapeutic space, but that exists.
And you can always use it as a transition space too. So if you know that
Yeah.
you're going to go do something stressful, before you do anything else in your day, go to that space that makes you feel safe and just exist for a few minutes. Drop into the safety. Allow
Yeah.
yourself to move up and down that polyvagal ladder before you move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Feel what that fluidity looks like
Mm-hmm.
before stepping into this thing that you know might keep you in fight or flight for longer than it needs to.
Yeah. What can you tangibly do? How can you figure this
Mm.
out? Being able to understand when you're in the different states can be so
Yeah.
useful, but you can also use that to understand what coping skills you need. So, like, I'm in fight or flight. Well, don't want to do something that's going to activate me more. I want to calm down. So maybe I'll actually let myself dissociate a little. I'll let myself freeze. I'll get on social media. I'll like out to an easy TV show. I'll just sit and stare at the ceiling for a minute, like dropping into the other system to then bring yourself back up to safety. Or the other way around, if I'm shut down, if I'm dissociated, sometimes I'll lean into it a little to be like, "Hey, I see you. Like, you need to dissociate a little bit." But then, like, for a walk or do some
Yeah.
crutches. So you can like lean into that system and then drop into the other one before you try to go to safety versus like, "No, I need to calm down. My therapist said I needed to calm down. I've got to calm down, calm down." Like, sometimes it just doesn't work to drop into safety.
Yeah. I love this work so much.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite part is watching someone start to get it because it's not going to
Yeah.
be quick. It's not going to be some giant light bulb, but eventually like come in and they're like, "What can name this feeling?" And oof, man, I
Yeah.
was in fight or flight. And then I took a walk around the block and let myself sit on a bench for a minute and I felt better. Like, ah, you did it. You listened to your body and your body responded.
Yeah. I love too when they start to connect the dots. Maybe a single thing that they came into therapy for, right? Like what they saw as like a pretty singular targeted problem. They realize how it connects to different areas of their life
Mm-hmm.
and how the moment you listen to your body in this one way, you see all of these other changes unfold in other areas of your life, right? And the more you're in this space, I think your idea of health and wellness really expand, right? So it's not just mental health anymore. We talked about areas of physical health, we talked about areas of performance, we talked about areas of social health and sense of connection, sense of belonging. All of that stuff changes. And so I think it's really magical to seeing all of these different domino effects
Yeah.
once you start admitting that you're angry and not annoyed.
You're not just slightly frustrated, you're pissed off.
Yeah.
It's not like felt down today. No, like you're deeply sad,
Yeah.
and that's
It's okay to
okay.
be. Yeah. Yeah, this was so fun.
Yes. Thank you for coming on Insights with us. You are welcome back anytime. I think there's a lot that got left unsaid today, but we did hit some very important pieces. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out.
I could talk about trauma all day, and I am grateful that Amanda decided to join the Insider family. There are so many layers in how trauma can show up for us. And if we can step away from the intellectual long enough to see that effect on us, well, then we can start to create insight and maybe show up a little differently. Hopefully, something we talked about today resonated with you. If it did, let yourself sit with that idea for a little while longer. If you have any questions for this podcast or any themes you'd like us to focus on in the future, send us a message on Instagram at Insights With Us Podcast, or send us an email at insightswithus@gmail.com. You can find Amanda Ng at mindtomatter.co. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please follow, like, or subscribe. If you want to support the continuation of this podcast, you can donate. To do so, find me, Anastasia Soroka, on buymeacoffee.com. If you want a chance to sponsor an episode, you can find Insights with Us on Patreon. I hope to build exclusive content eventually, but bear with me. My business and world are expanding this year in every direction. I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you are listening. Thank you for creating insight with us.